unique facet of this investigation from a hate crimes perspective. Number of people who were abused by Dave Merryman. Cruelty they had to endure.
A landlord of last resort, so he could take advantage of these individuals.
I've been a federal prosecutor for 15 years. I have never seen a case like this. These civil rights violations against, everyday people in Hampton Roads.
14 years ago, I was looking for another house to live in because I was in a slum house that was infested by termites.
When Uganda Sample Jones needed a new place to call home,
and Dave had a house around the corner from where we were.
She didn't look far. She found David Merryman, a landlord who owns 98 properties across Newport News and Hampton. But she couldn't expect choosing to live in a Merryman property would be a regret she holds on to still.
He is someone who is manipulative. He likes to get over on people.
Where most landlords repair their properties when needed, Merryman often wouldn't.
We had a ceiling leak from our top floor to our bottom floor. He left it a gaping hole in our roof, in our ceiling for about a few months.
In many cases, these properties were condemned. In many cases, they didn't have the things anybody would expect to have in a house. Mm-hmm. Appliances, furnaces, air conditioning.
According to a 58-page federal indictment against Merryman, he repeatedly refused repairing his properties, leaving them with faulty air conditioning, plumbing problems, sewage inside the homes where people lived. One renter even fell through the floor of his house filled with rodents because it rotted away. The details still stand out for Ted Rose, a former special agent with the FBI Norfolk Field Office, who investigated the case.
One stands out to me in particular. This woman had to walk her children down the street to use the toilet because the house she was renting from Dave Merryman did not have a functioning toilet in it. Rodents and insects crawling across the floor.
Piggyback on what Ted said, as far as his business practices, he focused on vulnerable victims. Typically, it was minority females, single minority females with children.
Federal HUD investigator Robert Pladek adds that Merryman's targeted tenants were often those who are most vulnerable.
They really had no other choices. It was either move into a Merryman property or be homeless, essentially.
This is the first case where we have had criminal charges brought against a landlord for knowingly not keeping the property up to safe and sanitary conditions. In order for a landlord to continue to participate in HUD and get HUD payments, they have to certify that the programs are held to a certain standard. And the facts here are so egregious.
But the federal investigation into David Merryman isn't only about what he did, but how he did it.
I think the uniqueness of this case, though, is the civil rights component of that.
Racist harassment.
Derogatory names, like, do you want me to say them?
Being a Merryman tenant often meant being the subject of physical threats and verbal abuse. Rooted in Merryman's verbal threats were racial slurs and racist intimidation.
He would initiate this process of racist harassment and intimidation until they either moved themselves out or he would evict them. And in some cases, he would actually sabotage the utilities on his own houses in order to get people out.
In the federal case against Merryman, victims range from Hampton Roads residents to the federal government. Beyond tenant intimidations was a scheme to illegally obtain federal dollars. Merryman pleaded guilty to charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and racial interference with housing and employment, allegedly forging signatures and his identity as tenants to illegally obtain COVID-19 rent relief from the Virginia Housing Development Authority.
Mr. Merryman took money away from other individuals that rightly deserved it, limited amount of funds in the rent relief program, and there was a very high demand. You know, the demand certainly outstripped the supply.
A pattern is a way to establish someone's specific intent to defraud. And so someone like David Merryman, who is repeatedly making false claims for rent relief benefits to the Virginia Housing Department, you can prove circumstantially his intent to defraud that government agency by his repeatedly doing it over and over. You know, it's not a one-off mistake or something that, you know, he didn't see happening. It was a very meticulous, careful thing that's revealed through the pattern of how someone does it over and over again.
A federal judge sentenced Merryman to serve 17 years in prison. A bittersweet moment for his tenants who may be happy he'll serve time, but may still live in one of the houses he owns.
And we're still in his house. It's a lot of money to move. Like, you need a deposit, and you need the last month's rent.
But for now, investigators and his tenants feel relief knowing he's behind bars.
This is the first case where I was receiving phone calls and emails thanking our agency and our partnership for taking Merryman off the street.
It is unfortunate that there are so many examples, criminally and civilly, of misuse of CARES Act funds.
Combination of egregious conduct that we see here is really unprecedented, though.
Poetic justice in this case, because in my opinion, Dave Merryman could never survive being sentenced to live in one of his own rental properties.